Put the palms down. All right, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all here. Thanks for showing up. Somebody just asked me, it was yesterday, and I share this every so often, but different people here at different times, obviously, so maybe you've heard it, maybe you haven't, but somebody asked me about the joined palms. And they said, what does that mean? Right? And everything with Buddhist ritual, any religious ritual or practice, many different meanings, translations, practices. So there's not necessarily one universal meaning for what that is. They will vary pretty drastically. But I'll just share what I was taught from my teacher. And she said, when you bring your palms together, you're taking everything from the past over here and everything from the future over here, and you're bringing it to this present moment. And she taught me that, it stuck, and ever since then, that's what it's meant to me. It doesn't mean that there's some Buddhist sutra that describes what the hands were like coming together in some, prayer mudra or something like that, but as many of you have heard me say, I don't care if the Buddha said it or Donald Duck said it, right? If it's kind and compassionate and gentle and makes life better for yourself and others, then go with it. So for me, that was always a beautiful practice of just past, future, which is where we spend so much of our time, mentally, emotionally, right? Our minds, our thoughts, our hearts are very rarely in this present moment. So past, future, coming together in this moment. And years ago, there's a guy, he's been around here like 10 years, and this was at the old Buddha for You location. So just like here, I would do my offering and I would say, if you want to join palms, and I don't see behind me, I don't care if people join palms or not. I mean, that's up to them, it doesn't really matter. It's my practice, so I just share that. And so he told me this story after a couple years that for the first year and a half of doing it, he would never join his palms. And he said it was really just his own ego, and he really had problems with authority figures and people telling him what to do. Any of you fit that category? I'm sure none of you, but this guy did. And so he said, for a year and a half, he never did it, right? And like I said, there's no judgment. We're not watching to see who does that. It doesn't get you closer to the Buddha if you bring your palms together. I honestly don't care if you do it or not. But so then he said he was at work one day, and he was just super stressed out, angry, having a bad day, and he was sitting at his desk, and all of a sudden, this is my retelling, obviously, of how he told it to me, but he said all of a sudden, he just, out of nowhere, put his palms together. And the way he described it wasn't even like he consciously thought for 5 minutes, oh no, what should I do? He just, in his moment of panic, stress, anxiety, whatever he was feeling at that moment, he brought his palms together, and he had this whole realization of wow. And that's when the palms joined meant something to him. And as I often say when people ask questions about rituals and the statues and the iconography and 2,500 years of different cultural, religious practice, I'm not a big fan of doing things or people doing things when it doesn't mean anything to them. And if and when certain things resonate with you, then they do. And if they never do, that's okay too. But I thought that was a really beautiful example of when something resonates with you, it resonates with you. And so I tease him to this day. He still is resistant to it. He's really that stuck in his ego and in his pride. And, God forbid somebody else should tell him what to do, because we all know he knows what he's doing, he had that one moment of clarity without really thinking about it. And I just think that's a beautiful example. So With that, we're going to start with a meditation practice. To those who are joining virtually, welcome. Glad you're here. Thanks for showing up. Feel free as you are. There's a chat box on your screen somewhere. Say hello. When we get to questions, you can put them there as well. For those who are maybe new or joining for the first time, a couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. All right? You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit, we're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. And this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion, often helps. Slide to the front third. Pushing the stomach forward allows the back to straighten. Shoulders are relaxed. If you're on a bench or chair, however you're seated, same thing, just relax the shoulders, hands or knees or lap. I'll guide us as we begin. We'll settle into a little bit of silence. Most important, do not expect anything. We're just going to sit and breathe. Starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. I'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. Eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath. Expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Turn attention, focus to the breath. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. letting go of expectations, letting go of judgment from the practice, just sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do, nowhere else to go, and no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And as you slowly open the eyes, slowly beginning to move, and most important, with the practice of meditation is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. Realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppatta. It means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. What that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless where you come from or what you believe in or where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens, more reactions, that's it. That's what we get. This practice is simply learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to every other 20-minute period of your day. And so all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. Well, the mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not an easy practice. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often people think it is. It is direct perception into the present moment. And very often that present moment is filled with chaos, conflict, difficulty, challenges. So we're simply learning to be with life as it arises. That in essence is what we're practicing with meditation. You're not practicing meditation to accomplish anything. You're not practicing meditation to get anywhere. You're not practicing meditation to change anything. You're actually practicing what it's like to just sit with something as it is. And that in and of itself is incredibly difficult for so many people. Because so much of our day is constantly, and so much of our lives have been constantly changing, running, escaping, moving, physically, mentally, emotionally, from things as they are. And so this is just learning what is it like to sit with life as it is. And when I always talk about it not being mystical or magical or anything like that, the reason I say that is because I want people to understand that if they go into meditation thinking that they're going to get something from it, then you're missing the entire purpose of what meditation is about. Meditation is your entire life. As the Buddha said very clearly, sitting, standing, walking, or lying down, it is your entire life. Meditation is not separate from your life. Meditation is a concentration and focus on the present moment, which most people have an incredibly difficult time doing. But that doesn't mean that meditation is something other than your everyday life. The practice is to bring concentration and focus and presence into everything you're already doing. Where the mindset of most people when they begin this practice is they think, well, my life is this, so I need to go over here and do this meditation thing. to cope with this over here. Bring the practice of stillness, of presence, of concentration, of focus into everything you're doing. That's what this practice is. When you can do that, nothing bothers you. And you can still create incredible change in the world. Because change is necessary. So much of our daily lives and the lives of those around us are filled and driven by actions coming from a place of greed, anger, and ignorance. So this practice is to recognize that. Starting with ourselves. Our own recognition of our greed, our anger, and our ignorance. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's just sitting, breathing, and becoming aware of your thoughts. That's it. And that just repeats. I don't find Buddhist practice any more difficult or complicated than that. That, my friends, in and of itself is hard enough as it is. Feel free to read as much as you want to read and learn a bunch of Sanskrit terms and say a bunch of fancy words that make you sound like you know what the heck you're talking about. But that stuff doesn't change your life. What changes your life is your ability to recognize what you think, what you say, and what you do, and have the discernment to think, say, and do things differently from how you're used to thinking and saying and doing things. That's what changes your life. You don't get that from a book. You don't get that from another language, another culture, another religion, another philosophy. You get that from everything you have with you right now in this very moment. It just takes practice. So with that, I'll pause. And as always, I really prefer to respond to questions around meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with. And again, to those who are joining virtual, glad you're here. Feel free as you are to say hello. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box. I'll do my best to respond. But we'll use the rest of our brief time this evening for questions. Oh yeah, second.
I think you said that if you were in the present moment often, in that moment, nothing can bother you. Can't something bother you? Like, aren't you supposed to just sit with the bother?
Sure. Oh, go ahead.
Is that not what's supposed to happen?
So the question, to paraphrase, just for those virtually didn't hear it, is, so what you said, I think what you said, is that you think I said that if you're in the present moment that nothing bothers you. And so what you're asking is, well, if you're in the present moment and something's bothering you, in essence, is there anything wrong with that? Can't you just sit with what's bothering you? Absolutely. I think of this as kind of stages, and I don't mean like advanced or beginner. I don't mean better than, this isn't like going from 3rd grade to 4th grade to 5th grade. But I think it's a recognition of where we're at. Meaning, to your point, absolutely. If you, and in a very practical, realistic sense, everyone in this room, well, I don't know, unless there's some enlightened folks in here I'm not aware of, everyone in this room is going to be bothered. Probably within the next 30 minutes by something. Definitely within the next 3 hours, So, to your question very specifically, when you're bothered, sit with that is a beautiful practice. I am bothered. I'm going to sit with this. Because when we're bothered and we don't sit with it, what do we usually do?
React.
react. And when we're bothered and we react, is that reaction usually coming from kindness and compassion or coming from some other place of anger, ignorance, right? So that reaction when we're bothered leads very often to just more chaos. So learning to sit with being bothered is an absolutely beautiful practice, and I think incredibly important. And very far from where many of us are at, because that's really kind of, when I look at stages, that's what we're learning. We're learning to be bothered and just sit with it. Does that make sense so far? Yeah.
I assume the same thing applies to sadness or any feeling.
Yes. Yes, the same applies to sadness, anxiety, anger, stress, depression, all these feelings. But the kind of next, as I said, for lack of a better word, stage of this is, again, to drive home realistically, as humans, unenlightened folks trying to get through our day, we're going to be bothered, we're going to be sad, you're going to be stressed, you're going to be depressed, you're going to be anxious, you're going to be all those things. Learning to sit with it is key. But what if you weren't those ways? Wouldn't that be nice also? So I just don't want to, because that in essence is what the Buddha was teaching. The Buddha wasn't teaching that we should have stress our whole lives and just sit with it. He wasn't teaching we should have sadness our whole lives and just sit with it. He wasn't teaching we should have anger our whole lives and just sit with it. He was teaching how can we understand and see the nature of that stress, that sadness, that anger, whatever that emotion might be. And instead of just sitting with it, contemplate it and see where it's coming from. And begin to see the impermanence of it, the emptiness of it, meaning it's always changing. So we can get to a place, and again, I don't want to say this is like better or more advanced, but so we can get to a place where we're just not bothered. I mean, that sounds nice, right? So I feel like that's, as a practice, what we're working towards. And for me, it's kind of like the expression of, life is filled with suffering. I don't wake up as a practitioner and think, hey, is all my suffering going to go away by like Wednesday? It's not going to happen. But can I suffer, as I always say, a little bit less today than I did yesterday? Can I suffer a little bit less tomorrow than I did today? So I don't have, Jamie, this unrealistic goal of like, oh, I'm into Buddhism because all of a sudden I think my suffering is just going to vanish and go away. No, it's there. It's not going away. But can I see it and diminish it, decrease it, have it occur less often? If I can do that, then that's beautiful. So I just don't want to kind of sell ourselves short and think that the end game is just to always be with our pain. That's kind of my metaphor of, if you have a headache, you take 2 Advil, right? Or whatever you take. And hopefully the headache goes away. Next day, headache comes back. What do you do again? 2 more Advil. So we spend our whole lives popping 2 Advil to get rid of headaches. Well, if we can understand why the headache is arising and stop getting headaches, we don't need Advil. That's what we're working on. Yeah. What else? So there's a question here that says, can you please talk about the concept of impermanence and its connection with suffering? Sure. Anyone in person want to play along with this question? Virtually, it's really hard to just see a name and like banter back and forth. When was the last time you suffered?
Yesterday.
Yesterday. Are you still suffering from that yesterday?
No.
No. There's your answer, my friend. This is how impermanence, that's why I wouldn't have worked virtually, right? I would have been suffering waiting for an answer. But that would have been impermanent because that would have ended at 8 o'clock and then I wouldn't be suffering anymore because I wouldn't be waiting for an answer. But that's the reality, is that the question very simply, how does impermanence apply to the connection of suffering? Everything ultimately, and this might be difficult to kind of sit with if we're dealing with heavy trauma or things like that, but everything that we are suffering from is impermanent. Our emotions are impermanent. Our thoughts are impermanent. Our experiences are forever changing. So we suffer because we're attached to things going a certain way. And little things throughout our lives, an argument, a disagreement, something that occurred that we don't like, in that moment, it creates tremendous suffering. But the impermanence teaching tells us that all conditioned phenomena will change. So everything is changing all the time. Therefore, suffering can and will cease to exist. Or, as I just alluded to, decrease. So, yeah. Question here. How do we move forward without getting attached to the goal or having expectations of an outcome, and why? It's a good question. Next question. What else? I'm serious. Yeah. I'm what they call like a hands-on learner, and maybe it's because I just don't like to read, and when I learn stuff, I have to do it to learn it. And to me, some things just real life examples, like right there was a question, they want an answer. They're not going to get an answer. That is the answer. That's how. Yeah.
Earlier you just spoke about the impermanence of emotions, and we were specifically speaking about anger, frustration, any type of suffering. And then beforehand, we also talked about not being attached or being here in the moment when I'm dealing with that suffering and whatever, negative feelings. Cannot the same be said for positive feelings and joy and happiness?
Around impermanence or around, finish that?
Around impermanence.
Yeah.
And then around that we should just perhaps just live with it. I guess, yeah, it did cycle. I guess the completion of that conversation before was the impermanence.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I just wanted the end part.
Yeah.
So, why do you think most people come to places like this? They want what? Give me one word.
Relief.
Relief. Say again.
Peace.
Peace. What else?
Clarity.
Clarity.
Insight.
Answers, insight. I love how nobody is saying the word I was thinking.
I'll just guess. Happiness.
There you go.
There you go.
Right? I mean, everything you all said, again, there's no wrong answer to whatever you just said. But it's in my head, the first word that popped to mind, why people come here, is they want happiness. And all those things are parts of happiness, and happiness is parts of all those things. That's your mistake. You came here wanting happiness. If we stop wanting, right, the craving, that the greed, anger, ignorance, right, the second noble truth, the root cause of suffering, greed, anger, ignorance, or craving, attachment, aversion. This practice in kind of Western culture is really, it's like the Dalai Lama wrote a book titled The Art of Happiness. And it was, bestseller, millions of copies sold in America, because what do Americans want? We want to be happy.
Now.
We want it, and we want it now. And what makes us happy? Getting what? Everything we want. Stop wanting anything, including happiness. Now, I know this might sound crazy, like I'm trying to tell you all to be miserable. Don't worry, be happy, right? But it's the same thing. Now, again, I do want to add, the Buddha said there are healthy cravings, healthy desires. The desire to suffer less, the desire to be happy is not bad or wrong. But it is as impermanent as anything. So ultimately, the practice is not about making sure we're always happy. I think of it as I don't know if you've heard me use this metaphor, but life is very much for many people like a roller coaster. right? You get these big highs, and you come crashing down. You're like, well, this sucks. And then you get this big high, and then you come crashing down. You know what Buddhist practice is for me? It's the kiddie ride at Disneyland. It goes like this at about a half a mile an hour, and nobody gets hurt. I mean, I'm sure somewhere some kid got hurt, you know. No disrespect to the kid who got hurt, but I'm just saying, that's what Buddhist practice is. It's the kiddie ride. It's not about the happiness, and it's not about the misery. It's about the present time awareness with life as it occurs, and engaging in life with loving kindness and compassion. And a gentle way of being. It's engaging in life that way. Because as soon as we start kicking into like, I want happiness, you've had happiness before in your life, right? Does it stay?
No.
No. You've had sadness in your life, right? Does it stay? No. So they're both. To your question, absolutely. It applies to both. But I introduce it this way because it is, I don't want to say like, I don't want to make it sound like people coming here for happiness and peace and clarity and all the beautiful things you said is a mistake. I'm not trying to present it that way, but I want us to understand that there's not like, the Buddhist teachings are not about making sure you're happy. It's redefining, if I had to kind of put it a certain way, it's redefining in our minds, because we've conditioned ourselves our whole lives for what we think happiness is. And it's really hard to change that. But that's actually what this practice is doing. It's helping us redefine what happiness is. Because happiness is a story we've been telling ourselves, or a goal, or a kind of a box with a picture and a description. We have a definition in our heads and in our hearts of what happiness is. And so we've been seeking that forever. And for me, this practice is absolutely freaking shattering that box of what you think happiness is. And realize that the misery that you experience in your life is the happiness. The happiness that you experience in your life is the happiness. The joy in your life is the happiness. The sorrow is the happiness. I'm in essence just trying to ruin your definition of the word happiness. Sometimes I hear people say content, and I'm not a huge fan of that word because it almost sounds like, well, this sucks, but I'll deal with it, you know? And it's really deeper than that. Does that at least give you a little more to think about along those lines?
Sure. Also, I personally, I prefer the word joy over happiness.
Yeah.
I feel joy has more of a spiritual connotation to it, as opposed to happiness. I think can also be a misnomer, because people can sometimes become happy at other people's misfortune.
Yeah.
And so therefore that happiness is, I don't know if I want a better word, impure.
Right. Well, that's what I'm talking about, redefining and really looking honestly, authentically, genuinely at what is happiness.
Yeah.
To me, happiness is when people and animals and all sentient beings don't suffer.
Yeah, lack of suffering.
So, by that definition, I'm never happy. But God, I enjoy my life. And I see all the pain and all the suffering and all the just shitty behavior and still enjoy life. But I do not seek happiness the way that I always thought of happiness. And that's really strange for people. Because people will look at you and think, oh, well, this is what makes you happy because that's what made you happy before. Yeah, but I'm not that person. The stuff that made me happy before would literally make me miserable right now. Both are unhealthy extremes. But either way, you're starting to re-look at what happiness is. And then your intention goes into what brings that, as you said, joy. And again, you know, I'm very often the wrong guy to answer a question like this because I'm a Zen practitioner. Sit down, shut up, breathe. I was talking to myself, not you.
Yeah, I get it.
So, Oh, so this same person that asked the question that I ignored last time. But for the record, my ignoring you is the same thing as an answer. So I don't want you to feel like I didn't answer your question. I answered it. I just answered it probably in a way that was completely different from what you were expecting, which was my intention. And then the question after that, oh, I got an LOL. It's okay. So that's good. But the other question here is, what even is forward if there is no goal, desire, expectation? So yeah, exactly. This whole idea of, that's what, to me, this practice where it really begins to change your life is when you shatter this notion or concept of expectations or moving forward or goals. And it doesn't mean that you just become like a log and you drop out and you do nothing. Always bring this practice back to what is your intention? Not what are your expectations or what are your goals. What is your intention? And if your intention behind your actions is coming from loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, these are the 4 Brahma Viharas. If your intention is coming from generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, wisdom, these are the 6 Paramitas. If your intention is coming from right view, right thoughts, right speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration, this is the Eightfold Path. If your intention is coming from these places, that is your focus. Not what do I get from it, what comes from it, what am I attached to from it, what am I expecting from it, what do I hope to get out of it, what do I hope happens from it. You abandon that expectation. That's the Bodhisattva teaching of no gift, no giver, no receiver. To give without any expectation of getting anything in return. That's the practice, ultimately. What else? Yeah.
I'm a word person, so would Samapata be origination?
You mean
I love
Pratitya Samapata? Oh, dependent origination?
Dependent.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't tell you the breakdown of the semantics of it. I just know that the phrase Pratitya Samupata means dependent origination. But I couldn't tell you if Pratitya is dependent and Samupata is origination.
Okay.
You can Google it. Yeah. But Pratitya Samupata together means dependent origination. Yeah.
It's been such an interesting, great questions that somebody asked.
Definitely.
And just what it gets me thinking about, maybe my question, but just a realization, and this was nice, is so much of my life I've pursued what I thought would bring me happiness, and often the things that I thought were bad outcomes were the best outcomes for me, and vice versa. Like often in my life, I have no idea what actually is good for me, and that's been something that has been pretty humbling in terms of what I thought my aspirations, my goals were, and what actually was worth pursuing.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it is interesting also. I think often for years and years, I kept a book in my head of every slight injustice, everything. I was just full of resentment and anger. Nothing was good enough, starting with myself and working its way out to everybody around me. And through a lot of work and this practice and other things, I'd like to think that I'm able to close the book more often.
Yeah.
Keep it closed. And I think that's the power of this in ways.
Yeah.
And to your point, that's not happiness or sadness. It's just a lot of maybe sick voices that I don't need to listen to anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I appreciate you sharing that. I think from, as a practitioner, being able to look at, it's funny, earlier today I go every other month up to the V in La Jolla. It's a retirement facility, and so I sit up there and do meditation and lead discussion, and we had a similar discussion today around that towards forgiveness, and starting with forgiving self for all the, as you say, the book you've been keeping of all the things you've done wrong, my book's, it's it's about 12,000 pages. I don't know how about yours, but being able to look at all those honestly and forgive yourself for doing it, apologize if and when appropriate, or if it was something from 30 years ago, they're probably over it. They don't want to hear from me now anyways. But being able to look at that honestly and not have hatred towards yourself. And what you said is so important, that compassion, that self-love, that forgiveness of self is critical, because it's really hard if you hate yourself, if you're angry at yourself, if you don't love yourself, to bring that into the world. And so, as an old teacher, he used to say, people would ask him, what's the best book to read? He was an old Zen teacher, and he would say something like, the book, he would ask them their name, and he would say, like, the book about Jeff. Meaning, like, the best book you can get to know and read is your own. Because that's where we begin to create some change in our lives, and then, with others. What else? Questions? Is there a hand back there? Or was this, oh, there we go. Yep.
Question about permanence and self. And yes, I know the self doesn't exist and nothing is permanent. But it was interesting when you said to the guy, have you suffered? Are you suffering now? I mean, I'm just going to speak for myself, I will never not suffer because my mother died, right?
Right.
Yet, I use it to motivate compassion, creativity, kindness towards others. But insofar as I perceive a self, that's a permanent feature, right? It doesn't mean that every day I wake up and I'm actively in the act of, suffering and crying and weeping and mourning. I guess it comes down to the Buddha had things that were permanent in his nature, that he was born in privilege and experienced all these things. I guess I'm just curious if you embracing the duality of those two ideas.
Sure. Yeah, so great question, all great questions around, to paraphrase, around the idea of self and impermanence. And you shared that for you, and that you understand there is no self and everything is impermanent, but for you...
I don't really understand that. I just say I understand that for the sake of...
Not that you fully get it, but, but as the example that you shared, that, the passing of your mother, that's something that you say is permanent, that you'll always suffer from. And so what I would say back to that is this idea, right, of this sense of self. And you kind of even said it in your response. I don't remember your exact words. It was a little quieter. But even in that, I think what you shared, something to the effect of, or at least it made me think this is what you're saying, that there are days that maybe you suffer more or less, or that it's harder or easier, for lack of better words, at your mother's passing. So, yes, the fact that she has moved on has happened. But your association to it, your relationship to it, your views of it, your experiences with it, even slightly, will change from day to day. Does that make sense? So it doesn't mean that your feeling of it is always the same. It sucks. So that pain will always be there. That suffering will always be there. And as I often say, the first thing the Buddha said was life is filled with suffering. He wasn't jumping to the rest. He was saying you're going to suffer your entire life. And the question is, why are we suffering? So I think it gets, and I don't mean this in connection necessarily with your question, but this is what triggered it. Us humans tend to be so goal-oriented and so start-finish. So many people come into Buddhism, again, this isn't to you, this is just in general. So many people come into Buddhism with this idea that okay, I've been at this stuff for 9 months, when am I going to no longer suffer? Look, folks, you are going to suffer your entire life. The rest of your life you're going to suffer. If you come here thinking that all of your suffering is just magically going to disappear and go away, you are going to be miserably disappointed. You are going to suffer your entire life. Aren't you happy to hear that news? Yay, this is so wonderful and joyous. See how joyful this is? See how happy this is? We're going to suffer our entire lives. But to understand that suffering, to understand the nature of it, to see how it changes, how our relationship changes, how it changes you. Like you said, you use it as motivation, to inspire. So all of that is changing. But the pain of losing loved ones doesn't go away just because Buddha said everything is impermanent, to put it very, simply. And I'll just kind of plant this seed, because you've been around this stuff long enough to know these teachings, whether they resonate with you or connect with you or have come into your life yet or ever, doesn't matter. But even our view of death might not be correct. So one could say, loved one passed. They're no longer here. Others could say, they were never here to begin with. Others could say, they're still here. Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching, no birth, no death, no coming, no going. Our relationship to that situation, right? I'm not going to get into this whole thing right now. I'm going to wrap up here in like 2 minutes. But, January 13th, 2020, 4.5 years ago, my mother just turned to 80 in January. 4.5 years ago, she had a hemorrhagic stroke, additional bleed, hydrocephalus, water on the brain. Doctor said she had a 3% chance of living and a 0% chance of ever functioning cognitively again. Fast forward to today, you would never, she's in a wheelchair. She can't walk. I mean, she does physical therapy and can walk with a walker and somebody holding on to her, but if you let go, like a weeble wobble, remember those things? She's like a weeble wobble. It will weeble, but it won't wobble back up. But if you talk to her, you would never know she had a stroke. My relationship to what I thought death was from that experience drastically shifted. And she will die. I will die. Everyone in this room will die. What can change is our relationship to what that is. And that's where I think the Buddhist teachings really challenges us around death, to open that up. But it's heavy, yeah.
I will say, I lost my caregiver too. I mean, I was very, very young.
Yeah.
So it's not just the loss. It wasn't, my father passed and I've had a lot of acceptance and peace around it. But I think it also has a context of and it gives me compassion for the many, many children in that circumstance. But it is when you say, oh, my mother had a stroke, I'm like, wow, you're lucky you got that long.
Understood.
So
yes.
It all kind of resonates with this kind of idea of permanence and moving through the world and knowing that some things are permanent and won't change, but knowing that everything is impermanent and always changes.
Yes. And full transparency. Transparency, is that even a word? That should be a word. If you were someone who was here for the first time and I had no idea who you were and you asked that question, I would not have gone into that second part. But the fact that I know you, love you, and know that my intention is coming from a good place, I felt comfortable sharing this, even though it might be a little uncomfortable for you and potentially for others in the room. And yeah, definitely, just to clarify for those who don't know me, not at all, and you're right, not at all trying to compare the stroke of Mom 4.5 years ago to the death of your mother. I bring that up only as that was something that made me re-look at death from the Buddhist teachings. That's why I brought that up. Is that experience, no matter how long I've been in Buddhism, it wasn't until 4.5 years ago that I started to dive deeper, much deeper into what is death really from the Buddhist teachings. So that's what shifted it, and that's why I brought that up. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to close on that. We'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to those who need it most. All right, so now before y'all head out, we have a few announcements from our host Anna.
I feel like I've talked too much already.
Oh, you're great.
I'll keep talking.
Just
I'll
casually
be
talking about
fast.
death.
Yeah, this is not about death. We opened the Dharma Bum Temple 18 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not nuns, monks, gurus, masters, or teachers, and are not looking for teachers, or for students, rather, or teachers. They are simply practitioners sharing their interpretation of the practice. Every night we have different classes led by different people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery sangha that meets several times a week for anyone with addiction, and our food redistribution program is every Thursday at 4:30. We have classes and programs every day, and everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on our website and also posted on the entryway above the shoe rack. We have a lending library. If you see a book you like, feel free to borrow it, then bring it back whenever you are done with it. Please straighten your seat or cushion before you head out. If a few people could stay to close and latch the windows, that would be helpful. Thank you for being here. We wish you well and hope to see you all again.